3.7 Understand Methods of Cryptanalytic Attacks. And remember, if I don't go deep enough in anything you need, don't worry. That's what we have our AI assistant for on the last slide. Alright, this task includes many subtasks and many of them that are very fundamental to the exam. So it's important to recognize these concepts across multiple domains. Right. By the end of the session, you should feel pretty comfortable with the terminologies and basic concepts involved here. So let's get started. Brute force attacks. A brute force attack is a very fundamental concept, and it involves trying all the possible combinations of a password or key until the correct one is found. The key metric is called entropy, which is measured in bits. So for example, an 8-bit key has 256 possible combinations. Now, important thing to remember is work factor. This means that I would only really need to guess 50% of those keys before the odds are 50-50 that I got it. Work factor, an important term on your exam, is based on the entropy of the key as well as processing power. For the exam, you'll need to understand not only what brute force attacks are, but how to assess their risk and an effectiveness based on entropy and work factor. As always, if you want to explore more, use the prompt at the end. Ciphertext only attacks. Anytime someone's not brute forcing, they found some other pattern or something. Those are called side channels, and there's many different types. Now, if I just have ciphertext only, I'm trying to solve the puzzle with either through brute force or finding some other patterns. So imagine trying to solve a puzzle with only knowing what the final picture looks like. That's essentially what an attacker faces in ciphertext only. Here the attacker has access only to the encrypted data with no information about the plain text or the key. Common methods used to break ciphertext only include brute force, but side channel attacks and a type of side channel frequency analysis, where attackers look for patterns in ciphertext, such as repeated letters or common phrases. The exam will test your understanding on how these attacks work and the various ways they can be mitigated. Known plaintext attacks. This type of attack is like solving a puzzle with a picture on the box of what it normally looks like. Yeah, you have clues to help you solve this. In this case, the attacker knows both the plaintext and the corresponding ciphertext, which gives them an advantage in identifying patterns in the encryption process to try to guess the key. In the exam, you might encounter questions asking how known plaintext attacks work or how they can be mitigated. For example, understanding how an attacker can use known plaintext to deduce the key or reveal other pieces of ciphertext is critical. This reinforces the importance of using strong encryption methods that resist known plaintext attacks. Frequency analysis. This is a type of side channel attack where it involves examining the ciphertext look for patterns, because frequently used characters, letters, or phrases might show up multiple times. Like the letter E in English, it's used statistically more likely than any other letter. For the exam, you need to understand not how just frequency analysis works, but also the context in which it's most effective. It's especially relevant for simpler encryption methods like pure substitution ciphers. More advanced encryption techniques, our modern block ciphers, do not do this, but that's the point. So we had ciphertext only, known plaintext. Now we move on to chosen ciphertext. This is when the attacker has a piece of ciphertext and is able to decrypt it. It's more powerful than the known plaintext. It's like being able to ask where a certain puzzle piece goes so you can solve the puzzle. This can provide insights into how the encryption process works and especially the key. On the exam, understand this attack's implications. It's essential, especially when considering how it can be mitigated. Adaptive chosen ciphertext attacks, where the attacker adjusts their input based on previous outputs, can be even more effective. This is where strong cryptographic and modern algorithms mitigate this type of attack. I wouldn't worry about with AES. All right, not in the official content outline, but conspicuously missing, because it's very testable, is the chosen plaintext attack. Among the cryptanalytic attacks we've discussed, this is particularly powerful. In the chosen plaintext attack, the attacker can create some plaintext and then see how it gets encrypted. This provides a very significant advantage, right? It's especially dangerous because the attacker can repeatedly test various versions of it to see how this works. Right? To combat this, a cryptographic system should employ something very testable. It's known as the avalanche effect. This effect ensures that a small change in plain text results in a drastic and unpredictable change in the ciphertext. Try it on an SHA calculator and just a little lab there and see what happens. Change one letter in something and see how the SHA hash fails. For the exam, understand the avalanche effect and its role in mitigating the chosen plain text attack. 3.7.7 side channel attacks is a very broad term, and anything but a brute force is a side channel attack. That includes everything that we've discussed so far. So they don't focus on breaking the algorithm themselves necessarily, but they would potentially even look at like processing power. These attacks exploit other environmental issues surrounding the operations. So rather than necessarily the algorithm itself, it includes everything we've talked about, and the goal is to gain some insight through an indirect mean. For example, timing attacks. How long does it take a cryptographic algorithm to do its thing? Fault injection, creating deliberate errors just to see how these things work. Mitigation strategies include reducing the data leaks and using randomization and implementing secure coding practices. Fault injection attack, I just mentioned, is a type of side channel attack. In this case, the attacker deliberately injects hardware or software faults into the system to cause errors in the cryptographic process, and the error can provide clues often about what's going on underneath. One famous example would be smart cards back in the early 2000s. By injecting a fault at a key moment in the encryption process, attackers were able to recover session keys. That's not the private key, but still very important. For the exam, you should be familiar with how fault injection attacks work and understand ways to mitigate them. Common defenses include error detection mechanisms, redundant processing, and secure hardware design. Timing attacks, also mentioned earlier. It's another type of side channel attack, and it measures the time it takes for a cryptographic operation to complete. So even small differences in that time can reveal information about the key or the plain text, particularly if an attacker can observe them over a long period. Timing attacks exploit the fact that various operations in cryptographic algorithms take varying amounts of time to execute. For example, certain steps in decryption might take longer when specific bits of the key are involved. By analyzing these timing differences, attackers can gradually piece together a key. For the exam, you need to understand that timing attacks emphasize the importance of system-level defenses. Techniques like adding random delays or using constant time algorithms help mitigate these vulnerabilities. Man-in-the-middle attacks, not specific to encryption. They can happen all over the place. We'll discuss them in networking with ARP and other things. But in this case, the attacker exploits a lack of proper authentication between the entities. So in a man-in-the-middle attack, the attacker pretends to be Bob to Alice and Alice to be Bob. The attacker can observe, modify, or inject messages between the two parties without their knowledge. A classic example is when an attacker intercepts and alters public keys during the exchange process, allowing them to decrypt and re-encrypt communication. This is really what your own data loss prevention systems are doing, but they're authorized man-in-the-middle. For the exam, it's important to understand how man-in-the-middle attacks are executed and how to mitigate them. Strong authentication of public keys in this context is the real answer here. Pass the hash attacks, also known as replay attacks. Right? So a lot of times we hash passwords and think, well, the password's encrypted. But if somebody captures that, they'll just replay that, so it doesn't matter. In a pass the hash attack, instead of cracking passwords, the attacker just captures the hashed version of it and just plays that. The attack often targets older authentication protocols. We know now to salt these hashes in most cases, but in the case of, say, NTLM, which is really hard to kill off in some cases, the hash value remains the same every time it's used. Once an attacker has the hash, they can pass it along and gain access. Kerberos systems do this. This is the same as a golden ticket or a silver ticket attack. The countermeasure there is to use SMB signing so that hash can only come from these IP addresses. For the exam, it's essential to know how pass the hash or replay attacks work and what mitigation techniques are available. Salting is generally the answer for this. As mentioned in the previous one, Kerberos exploitation can involve passing the hash. There's a couple of ways they do this. So one attack is known as Kerber roasting. And that's where we know that service accounts exist all the time, so people might try to crack the password or the token for a service which is always logged in, and then be able to replay that. In the golden ticket or silver ticket attacks, these allow attackers to forge tickets and gain access to systems pretending to be a domain controller or other servers in the environment. So for the exam, be familiar with some of these Kerberos attacks. Again, Kerber roasting, going after service accounts, golden tickets, domain controllers, silver tickets, any other server. Ransomware. Oh, it's possibly the most prevalent and damaging attack today. It happens all the time, right? Ransomware is a malicious software that encrypts the victim's data, holding it hostage until the ransom is paid. We hope, right? What makes ransomware particularly harmful is that even after paying, many victims don't recover their data, and studies show that 54% who pay the ransom fail to get anything back. Yeah. Ransomware is often spread through phishing attacks too. We have a lot of problem authenticating email. We'll still work on that, and we'll cover that in other domains. So for the exam, just know what a ransomware attack is, how to mitigate it, and that's generally through proper backups in our disaster recovery scenarios and planning. Whew, that was a long one. All right, well, let's summarize our cryptanalytic attacks. We discussed brute force, where you try every possible value, or 50% of those is the work factor, or some other method, some other side channel. And those side channels, because I knew the plain text, right, or I could choose ciphertext, or I chose the plain text, I did some timing thing, I did some fault injection, other ways, right, to figure it out. I don't care if you encrypted the password. I just copied that encrypted token and I replayed that, right? So that's the importance of salting our hashes when we do those types of things. All right, let's test our knowledge on the next slide. All right, I hope you're having fun with this. Right? You know what to do. You go down to step 5 and you put in what you want to learn more on. What did Larry not cover as well as you had hoped? See you soon.